This capability would be extremely valuable in crossing the multitude of rivers and canals protecting Germany's border. By the end of the war, an incredible 400,000 jeeps would have been built. The Avro Lancaster was designed in 1940 and took its first flight in early 1941. It was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engine fitted in the Spitfire fighter. The Lancaster was extremely fast and had excellent maneuverability. It was armed with 10 machine guns in 4 hydraulically operated turrets, and had one of the biggest bomb bays of any aircraft. It entered service with the RAF in 1942, and by the end of the war, more than 7,000 would have been built. The Lancaster was easily adapted for a number of specialist roles. Modified Lancasters carried bouncing bombs used to destroy Germany's dams. Later in the battle, the Lancaster was the only bomber capable of carrying the massive 22,000-pound Grand Slam demolition bomb. As the mainstay of the RAF's strategic bombing effort, the Lancaster would drop 600,000 tons of bombs, more than 2/3 of the total tonnage dropped by the RAF in World War II. By early September 1944, there were over 2 million Allied troops in France. 4 massive armies of Americans and 3 more armies made up of mainly British, Canadians and French. Since the D-Day landings, the Allies had suffered nearly 250,000 dead, wounded and missing. For most Allied troops, the fighting in Normandy was the first action they had seen. Their training for combat in the months preceding D-Day had been rigorous and extensive. They were also extremely well equipped, mostly with American weapons, and during the liberation of France, each Allied soldier had received daily more than twice as much rations and ammunition as his German counterpart. In the last 3 months, the Allies had advanced over 300 miles, and morale was exceptionally high. There was a firm belief throughout the ranks that the war could be over by the end of the year. However, this optimism occasionally drifted into complacency. To many Allied soldiers, the Germans seemed clearly beaten, and many saw no reason to die when the war was so nearly won. During the battle for the Rhine, the Wehrmacht would exploit this weakness to the full. At its peak, the German army had more than 200 full-strength divisions in the field. But 5.5 years of continual conflict had steadily taken a toll on the Wehrmacht's fighting capability. By September 1944, most of the remaining 224 divisions were merely fragments of the original formations. In Western Europe, since the Allies had landed in Normandy, the Wehrmacht had lost more than 2,000 armoured vehicles. Less than 100 had managed to escape from France. The German army's communication networks had also been badly hit by Allied bombing, and its supply levels had been greatly reduced. However, the remnants of the Wehrmacht were now close to, or actually in, Germany. This meant they were not just nearer to headquarters, which allowed improved coordination, but also their supply lines were much shorter, enabling faster deployment of replacements and reserves. Over the last few years, German production of armour and aircraft had been severely disrupted by the Allied strategic bombing offensive. However, in the first half of 1944, the Allies had switched the bombing offensive to transport and communication targets in France, in preparation for D-Day, and German industry had made a rapid recovery. It even surpassed previous output. However, after June, production dropped off rapidly as factories and raw materials fell to the Allied advance, and the Allied bombers returned to pound German industry. As weapons stock fell, the problem for the army was compounded by the Nazi leadership, which equipped raw replacement units with the best, while starving veteran divisions of weapons and ammunition. By the autumn of 1944, the Luftwaffe had surrendered control of the skies to the Allied air forces. On D-Day, it had only managed 250 sorties, compared to 14,000 by the Allies. Over the next few months, although it was equipped with advanced aircraft, it could do little but fight a delaying action. Nevertheless, the Luftwaffe fighters would continue to rip into Allied bombing formations until their airfields were captured by the advancing Allied armies, or until they were grounded by fuel shortages. The Panzer Mark V, or Panther, was designed in 1942 in response to the vastly superior performance of Soviet tanks. Throughout its first production run, the Panther was plagued by specification changes, and its weight increased by 9 tons. The extra weight had a detrimental effect on many of its original components, and the Panther would prove very unreliable, needing a great deal of maintenance. The Panther was fitted with a new, high-velocity 75mm gun, which with smaller and lighter shells still had better armor-piercing capabilities than most other tanks. The excellent gun, combined with good maneuverability and heavy armor, made the Panther far superior to any British or American tank. The Focke-Wulf 190 was designed in 1938 to be the main Luftwaffe fighter. Its greatest asset was its extremely powerful BMW radial engine. The 190 was one of the fastest piston-engined aircraft ever to fly. It was sleek and highly maneuverable, and by the end of the war, 20,000 would have been produced. When the 190 first saw combat in 1941, it quickly proved itself superior to all Allied fighters. It was smaller, faster, more maneuverable, and was also heavily armed with 2 cannons and 2 machine guns. The 190 was continually improved, and in late 1944, the final version would be one of the greatest fighters of the war. The Messerschmitt